So, start off with, I am David Brandon. I'm a copywriter. I work for Rainmaker Digital Services. I also do a lot of other things, but copyright is my technical job title. We're here today with Lee Kantor and Stone Payton from Business RadioX. And I'm super excited for this session. We're going to talk about how to start a successful podcast, what goes into that, some of the technical side of things, some of the strategy side of things, and just really bring some stuff to the table that I think is going to be really useful for you guys. So Stone, Lee, appreciate y'all being here.
Well, thanks for having us, man.
Yeah, we're excited to be here.
Yeah. So how the session will go is we do have some basic slides that we're going to go through with some information, that I put together with the Business Radio X guys, kind of some basic stuff. And then as we go through, we'll have opportunity for questions. You can drop them in the chat or the Q&A. You can shout them out. We'll have specific sections where we'll ask for feedback from you guys and just kind of see, what if you have experience, comments, anything that you want to add to the discussion. So let's go ahead and just kind of jump in here. So to get started with, let's just kind of talk a little bit about Lee and Stone and Business Radio X and give you a little bit of credibility for these guys. So Stone, I know we did this earlier. Why don't you kind of tell us a little bit about what makes you guys special?
Yeah, this slide hits me the same way today that it did the other day when we were walking through it. It's a little bit sobering, a little bit humbling. 18 years. And I did have black hair when we started this thing. And Lee already had stuff underway. But yeah, over that period of time, we have 100,000 plus conversations in the can. We are in 61 markets in some way. We have some presence in 61 markets. But in 19 of those markets, we have a physical studio like the one I'm sitting in right here in little old Woodstock, Georgia, with a hyper-local business model where we're meeting the needs of those communities. And yeah, man, it beats the heck out of work, and it's a lot of fun. I bet we probably made every mistake you could possibly make over the last 18 years, and we've learned a few things along the way. So if there's any of that would be of any value to the folks on this call or people who will tap in at a later date, we're delighted to share it. Maybe it'll shrink the timeline and remove a little friction for them.
Absolutely. All right. Let me just grab my notes here. Yep. So to start off with, I kind of just want to go over basically what's a podcast. We all kind of know it's a program made available in digital format for automatic download on the internet. There's a lot of different things that can go into that. We actually had a couple of people ask about specific points on this, which I'll toss over to you guys. It can be audio and or video. It can be scripted or it can be unscripted. It can be an interview like Business Radio X does a lot of those. You could think of like Joe Rogan's podcast as a well-known one. It could be an actual play like Critical Role, which is a very, very famous Dungeons and Dragons podcast. Could be like scripted true crime stuff. There's some people that use it as sort of a radio play format. There's as many different types out there as you can think of. I do want to mention we had a couple of questions earlier from before this from Michelle. In particular, was asking about scripted versus non-scripted. Whether you need a script, whether you should have a general outline, or whether it's better to kind of fly by the seat of your pants. What do you guys think?
Well, personally, I prefer unscripted, and my philosophy is about being a really good active listener. I believe in just having authentic conversations with people to really get their passion, get their expertise out, and I'll help facilitate that through the interview. But I'm a big proponent of non-scripted and not having someone just read stuff. I prefer it being a very authentic, organic conversation.
Agreed. I think for like interview show type stuff, if you want to do something like the radio play type thing, or like Serial's a famous one, like a true crime podcast, yes, like that's scripted. But if you're doing interview shows and that sort of thing, I think I'd have a couple of points written down of like, what questions do I want to ask? And then just kind of let it flow from there and not be tied to the notes.
Well, and
Uh,
I'll say right
but
now, if you do have 5 questions and you ask number 4, and then the person says, "Yeah, that was the time that my mom was dating Elvis,"
mhm.
don't go to question number 5. You gotta talk about the time mom dated Elvis. So it's a genuine conversation, at least in our model.
Yeah. And I think there's a few interviewers that I really, really admire. One of them is Sean Evans from Hot Ones. If you've ever watched that show, on and the thing they do really, really in-depth research on their people before people come on. The thing that really interests me about that is that Evans talks about he goes back and watches old interviews and looks for the points where somebody gets really excited to answer a question and the interviewer moves on and doesn't let them get to it, where it's like, oh, there's something here, that we should explore. Just being aware of those open doors and not being so tied to like, these are the questions we must ask, but being able to grab those things. Welcome, Susan. Glad to see you here. Well, we're just a little bit in, but feel free to drop any questions in the chat if you have any.
Well, I think I don't want to belabor the point, but I think that a lot of people miss out on the reason they're doing their podcast to begin with. In our model, it's to create relationships. That's our priority. So our true north is to give a person a great piece of content they're proud of that they'll want to share, but also to let them feel comfortable and encourage that type of sharing. I'm not trying to go down my own agenda of what I'm trying to get out of this. I'm not trying to even, kind of watch a clock to make sure I'm in and out of here in a certain amount of time. I want to give every interview a time to breathe and to just kind of play itself out in just a very organic, authentic way.
I think that's the key is to, we're far from the slide now, but I think the key is to give, right? Like the key is to go into it trying to make them the center, like for an interview show, to make them the center, to make them comfortable, to give them, as you said, something important, to them.
Yeah, I mean, and that's our model. I mean, that's how
Yeah.
we do it.
Yeah. So to move forward from here, we talked about it kind of runs the gamut. There's a few here. Stone, I remember you had a few things to say about some of these. Can we just kind of run through a couple briefly just to give examples of how many different types of podcasts there are?
Yeah, and just to give everybody some context, again, we've been doing this a long time. We have 257 media properties across 19 physical studios and 61 markets. So we got a lot of use cases, but a couple of these are fun. I'll maybe have Lee talk about one or two as well. On that far left, Training Pros, that's a training organization that does high-end 6- and 7-figure business with large organizations. Of course, we have the weekly show, but the most exciting use case for that is when they go to a trade show, instead of hiring a pretty girl to hand out Frisbees, they have their show in the booth with us running it. And so every person who comes through that expo hall and is speaking with them is a highly valuable, very targeted relationship. And they get to spend time with them before the interview, during the interview, after the interview, and they get past like the weather and the kids and all that really quickly. And it's just an incredible ROI. The Kid Biz Radio right next to it is one of my favorite because it's 2 14-year-old young entrepreneurs and they interview local business people. I love that one. Leah, maybe you'll want to talk about a couple like maybe Tech Talk and Buy a Business Near Me or Association or something.
Sure. Well, Tech Talk is a commercial real estate broker who wanted to build relationships with the funded startup founders in our local market. And we created a show, Tech Talk, that allows him to interview them. For him, that's super important, number one, just to kind of immerse himself in that ecosystem. But also, he knows those people in a short period of time have to leave the incubator they're in or the accelerator they're in and get space. They're funded and they're growing. And he, as a commercial broker, wants to be that first call when they do leave and get more space. So he uses his show to support and celebrate the work of startup founders, but also to build relationships. So when they do move and need permanent space, that he's the one that they call first. And then Stone mentioned we do a ton of work with associations where they leverage our platform to help spotlight their members to add more value to their membership, A lot of times they'll include us in their conferences where we'll do live broadcasts and interview their sponsors and their members in that environment as well. It's a great tool for associations to really add way more value to their members, plus create tons of social media content that they can be sharing throughout the year. And it's usually done in a done for you manner where we're just doing this work on their behalf in the background.
Right. So there's tons of different shows out there. I mean, this is just talking about like the ones that you guys have even touched. There's so much out there that you can do with podcasting. So, all of us are here obviously because we believe that podcasts matter. But why do they matter? From my perspective, as at Rainmaker Digital Services and other content marketing agencies, our parent company from way back, Copyblogger. We're not part of them anymore, but that was a thing for them too. We've constantly emphasized cornerstone content, having something, one big piece of content, whether that be a blog, a vlog, or a podcast. This is one of the three major pillars for content marketing. It's a great cornerstone piece for your business. There's a low barrier to entry. Even if you're not a great writer, most people can talk. It's very portable. Your listeners can be on the go. You don't have to be sitting at the computer looking at the blog post. It's easy to generate more content, and not only more content, but content that tends to get engagement on social clips, transcript, that sort of thing, which can also bump up your SEO. The transcripts are really good. Lead generation. Stone and Lee, that they've mentioned their business model a couple of times. It's great for that. You get to piggyback off someone else's authority. I've dealt with this. I've been on a bunch of podcasts for basketball stuff because I do a little bit of basketball writing on the side. And it really grew my audience a lot going on with people's podcasts. And it grew their audience because they were able to get me on and I brought my people. And then it increases your reach through syndication, through SEO, that sort of thing. So there's several different things, and I'll kind of pitch this over to you guys, BRX, that hold people back, hold businesses back from starting a podcast. So if you just want to kind of riff off this stuff, we've talked about a little bit.
Stone, you want to take this?
Well, yeah, it's a little bit hard for me because, I don't know. I don't get it. Once you know about this platform and a little bit about how it works, to not apply it to your business immediately, I'm often dumbfounded. And I guess I'm biased. And if you're professional services B2B and you need a handful of six-figure business or maybe a dozen five-figure deals, I don't know why you don't do it. Lee, you'll do a better job of answering this one than I will.
Well, from what I've heard of people who have done it, number one, they're doing it a lot of times for the wrong reason. They think they're doing it to become the next Joe Rogan or this kind of a mass media star. Yeah. And in our opinion, podcast is very niche, and it works in the best way when you just try to be kind of the micro celebrity for your niche rather than the mega celebrity. Or they're comparing themselves to other people that are out there doing things. If they think they're going to be Dax Shepard or again, Joe Rogan or Tim Ferriss or one of those people, they're not going to be happy with the result they're getting because those people come to the table with a lot of advantages that they are not going to have. And it's difficult to start from zero audience to build, millions of downloads in any length of time, especially if you're a small to mid-sized business owner with how much money that would cost. They don't realize how much money these people spend in promoting their podcasts and how much marketing dollars are invested. And plus they have their natural celebrity. So people underestimate the time, they underestimate the financial. And then a lot of people feel like, who am I to even begin this? I'm not an expert in this. And they don't really appreciate the expertise that they're bringing to the table as just, being good at what they do in their local market or in the niche that they serve. So all of those things are kind of psychological hindrances for a lot of people. And the stats back them up. I think, David, you had some stats on how many people start and stop a podcast or how many are actively out. That's
the next slide. Yeah. I was actually about to flip over to that. Yeah. So it's, you can see here, as I'll just throw that back to you, Lee, like I pulled it from, your sources. This is crazy.
Yeah. So less than 4% of podcasts that have ever existed have 10 episodes. I mean, that just shows you that they're going in there. And this is what is kind of sad for us, that they're investing all this money because, like we talked about earlier, they think the production's the most important thing. So they're spending money, thousands of dollars on equipment, getting the best, mixers and headphones and microphones. And then they quit after, less than 10 episodes. They're not seeing the ROI that's worth the time and energy and expense that is put into, managing a podcast. And so most of them, the vast majority of them, have less than 10 episodes. They quit in just a few months' time. And it's really sad because it doesn't have to be that way. And if they would just look at podcasting just slightly differently, they'd get way better ROI, and they'd get, it would be a lot easier to manage, and it would be a lot more productive.
Yep. So there were a few different areas that we talked about coming into this that are really important when you're starting a podcast. Stone, Lee, do you guys want to speak to this?
Well, I mean, these are the three big buckets, right? Our experience has been that when you design a show, it's going to hit whatever you aim it at. So you better be real intentional and real careful about where you aim it, and think about why you're doing a podcast. In our world, in our arena, the business model we've chosen, the fundamental reason that people want to do a podcast is they're trying to grow their graphic arts business. The business attorney is trying to grow that business. The CPA is trying to grow her business. An IT managed services person, all these professional services, B2B folks, they are, for most of them that I work with, once they get a chance to have a real conversation with a qualified prospective client, they're really pretty good at, they don't have to sell a lot. People know them around town. They're good people, but the prospecting is just horrible for them. And if you do it, at least the way we do it, you just eliminate the prospecting problem. That's gone. You invite someone to come on your show to talk about what they want to talk about, and you give them a chance to share their story and promote their work. And I mean, you build a relationship in the space of 45 minutes that would take you a year and a half, sipping on cocktails at the chamber meeting. It's just a whole different ballgame. So if that's your purpose, or if you're serving a client like we do through this platform, then you want to design the show so that it fits that purpose. So if that is the ultimate purpose, then you don't want to do a show that shows off how smart you are or even how smart they are. You want to do a show that does those things I just described. And so that impacts finding your voice, your client's voice, your guest's voice. And that's that's you want to amplify, find and amplify whatever is the important voice in that mix. And that really circles back to your audience. You absolutely have to have an audience, but you got to think about, well, what audience do I want? Do I want 50 people in this room over the course of the next 10 to 12 months that I want to build real relationships with? Or do I want, 500,000 people out there to know about the Stone is Smart podcast? They're both viable models depending on what you're trying to accomplish. But me, I'm a speed junkie. That's how I got in this business. Was I wrote a book about speed, personal and organizational speed. In my experience, it's a lot faster if the people you're trying that are going to write you checks, if you just bring them in the room with you, right? So that's why we do our model. So our audience at Business Radio X, almost without exception, are the people right here in this room, in the studio. And then you do build an audience over time that's out there. But most people that we work with, at least, and this may or may not be the case for you guys, they don't have a mechanism for turning an anonymous listener into revenue. And I'll ask some of my people sometimes when they kind of go down the Joe Rogan route, I ask them, well, do you listen to Joe Rogan? And yeah. Have you ever sent him a check? No.
Yeah. I mean, that does get to the point, though. I mean, like, you guys have a really successful business model, but there are a lot of different ones. For like Rogan, his audience is his, he's getting paid by sponsorships, and he's getting paid, there's a lot of different avenues to do this with.
Right. But if you want to go the audience route, then you better be in for the long haul and be
Yep.
willing to make all the investments you have to make financially and be patient to build an audience. I mean, Joe Rogan started out as a host of a television show on national TV. He also was working with the what is it, the fighting organization,
MMA. Yep.
right?
Or
So
UFC.
he wasn't some accountant in Des Moines, that says, "Hey, I want to start a podcast."
Yep.
This guy had a national. People already knew who he was, at least superficially, nationally. So it's very difficult for a regular person to just show up in front of a microphone and have the kind of expectation that I'm going to get $100 million deal from Spotify if I keep doing this. It's unrealistic. And most business people, I mean, in our market, we're strictly B2B. So we're business people serving business people. So in that model, most of our clients don't need, thousands of, clients in a week, a month, a year. I mean, that would be a lifetime more of clients for our clients. So it's one of those things where you have to know what you want out of this before you begin. And if you want to be Joe Rogan, then there's a strategy to be Joe Rogan, and just go in eyes wide open, because
Yep.
most B2B podcasters are trying to be Joe Rogan, and they're not Joe Rogan. They don't come to the table with what he came with. So it's better in our mind, if you're B2B and you need just a handful of clients, at least explore our model, because it's more realistic and it's more effective if that's what your goal is. But if you want to be famous and you want to be a celebrity, hey, more power to you. It's definitely possible. I'm not saying it's impossible. It's just difficult.
Yep. I mean, I think all of this, comes back to Ed Bardwell and I. This is something that comes up over and over and over again in our discussions and the things that we write about on Rainmaker Digital. It's intentionality. It's going after something specific, not just coming in like, I want to be Joe Rogan, or, I want to get customers from it. All right, great. How? What's your purpose? What's your voice? What's your audience? Defining those before you start, and really understanding just why you're doing the things that you're doing and being intentional about it. Because otherwise you're planning to fail.
Right.
So yeah.
So you got to be clear on the outcome you desire. I mean, number one, and then build that, build the model to achieve that. Don't just see somebody famous and just say, "Oh, I'm going to do what he's doing because it'll work for me somehow." I mean, that's not a good strategy going in.
Yeah. So now we'll just talk briefly kind of about the technical details. We have a few different slides on this that I've kind of condensed down to one. So I'll just pitch this to you guys, as far as some real basics. And we can also, when we send out the recording of this, have just a few details for things that, might be important. But yeah, take it away.
Well, it's if you got to know what outcome you desire. That's number one thing. And then once you know that outcome, when you're deciding on the name, in my opinion, literal is better than clever, because this is, especially the name, you're going to want, and David, you'll have a lot of opinions on this, I'm sure, regarding literal. That's the stuff that's going to show up on search. That's the words that are maybe your customers use or you use. If you can get that in the name, that helps you get, kind of the benefit, long tail benefit when it comes to search, using that name over and over again.
Yep. So there's the name, production pipeline. Do you guys want to talk anything about that, or just kind of address it case by case?
Well, I can share with you just in terms of workflow. Again, I am so enamored with, I'm a speed junkie, so I want something that's simple and easy. So from a workflow standpoint, you want to take as much of the headache out of it as you can. And so in our model, we are kind of Saturday Night Live. We don't do, we don't edit out the ahs and the ums and all that stuff. We'll put a fresh intro and a fresh outro. And when I say we, I mean a kid, or a virtual assistant. The physical equipment, you can see some of it here in my studio. I might have $1,500 invested in that. If anybody wants to get with me and avoid making the mistakes we made when we first started, and I can share with you some ideas on equipment. You got to be careful because there's a lot of overnight podcasting gurus out there that are trying to sell you their $19 book. So
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm happy to share with you the tools. Zoom is a great conferencing tool for your virtual interviews. There's editing software, but even now, I just processed the show out of the house because I have a little rig at my house, and I just loaded it up in some artificial intelligence, and it did all that equalizing, normalizing. All that stuff is commodity, and you can do it with AI or a combination of a contract person, somebody off of Fiverr, an intern, your niece. And for us, we want to be in control of our library. So we upload it to our website, but that's home base. And then Lee, maybe you want to speak to this, but from there, we get it out. We syndicate it as wide as possible.
Yeah, and obviously the big ones, Spotify, Google, which is now moving to YouTube Music. Podcasts are going to be in 2024 no longer on Google Podcasts. It'll be YouTube Music. Then Amazon, all the big players, iHeart, they'll all take your RSS feed. They'll all, they need content themselves. So if anybody's going to hand them free content, they're happy to take it. There's hundreds, literally, of places to distribute a podcast nowadays. There's some software you can use that helps automatically distribute it. And a lot of times they're just going to, once you have an RSS of your show, which our show is hosted on Rainmaker platform, and that's one of the things that we do have there is an RSS for all the shows. That those RSS feeds get scraped by these platforms that you're not even aware of, and your show will show up in places you couldn't even imagine.
Yeah. So, I mean, we had a couple of questions about that. I hope that answers. I think it was Susan and Michelle kind of asked about some of that stuff. So yes, those are, like you said, the household names, those matter, whatever other platforms you want to. Kind of going back to uploading the show, again, something that we really talk about at Rainmaker Digital Services is owning and not just renting. So having a home base where your show lives and not just having it on those services is really important.
That's critical because every single one of those big names will change the game at some point. And and if you're relying on them exclusively, you may not be happy with how they change the game. And a lot of these places start out with a an easy and it seems like too good to be true deal for free, and then all of a sudden the things you used to get are now you're paying for, and you're not going to be happy with that. So I can't emphasize enough to control your own content. At a minimum, you should be building, email lists with subscribers. You can't rely on any of those platforms to help you really grow your business.
So yeah, that's really important. So that kind of covers a lot of the technical details stuff. I've seen some people kind of popping in and out. We're just going to jump into questions and stuff. A lot of these were sent in ahead of time, so some of you are going to be seeing this on the recording. Oh, hey, Val's back. Yeah, the people, I've been seeing a few people coming and going. So yeah, if you're here, feel free to shout out your questions or drop them in chat. In the meantime, we're going to run through some of the ones that have been submitted already. This one comes from, let's see, this first one was Susan. So she says, if you have a great body of knowledge but don't have a lot of time, what do you recommend for frequency, length, etc.? What do you guys think?
Well, we do for Business RadioX, we do something called Pro Tips, where Stone and I record just short 2 to 3 minute little nuggets of thought leadership. And the way we do this, the way we facilitate it is in a 30-minute session, we'll record 10. And then we will then roll those out as a daily tip. And then we do that a couple times a month. So we create thought leadership and we use it as kind of a featurette in this kind of little mini podcast that people seem to like a lot. That's how we do thought leadership. So Stone, do you have any thoughts on that?
No, that's to me, that's the best way to do thought leadership. And I mean, we must have thousands of tips at this point. And so I like doing it that way. And then but on the other formats, I prefer, like a weekly rhythm at least, but I think the real key to it is some consistency so that whoever you are bringing into your circle you're consider. I don't think you do it like a Tuesday this month and a Wednesday next month, and then you skip the next month. So consistency for length in our model, we set aside an hour and a half of studio time. We recommend that they do a 30 to 45-minute show because, again, we're trying to build relationships, and where the real, we call it the post-show glow, where the magic happens in our world is after everybody's gone on this roller coaster ride, they've learned about each other, they've shared their story. And I mean, you talk about a bond, and they don't want to leave the studio. So we don't want to rush them out of here. That's when they are really, that is when things just shine. So as far as length of time, if it's an interview format or you do decide to have a group of people, even virtually, man, give yourself a little room on that back end, I think.
Yep. And I think you guys nailed it as far as consistency being really important, because from a content marketer's perspective, that's absolutely key. People knowing that, this time each week, this time each day, that something's going to happen, and having that expectation that's constantly fulfilled will take you far. All right. Next question we've got here. This is from Val. Podcasting using your cell phone, getting started, tips for entry-level equipment. What do you guys think?
Well, I have a specific experience with this because I was doing a little talk for a local business group. It's been about a year ago, 18 months ago. And I was trying to impress upon them this idea of don't get all caught up in the equipment and all that stuff. You were podcasting a long time ago. If you ever hit record on conferencecall.com, you just didn't know it. And now you can be broadcasting live while you do it. So to prove the point, I said, let's just make this talk a podcast. And so I went on an app we use a lot in our system called Spreaker. And it's really easy to broadcast live, capture, the recording. And so I did it right there in front of them on my cell phone with my mobile Spreaker app. So, I mean, entry-level equipment, if you'd have zero money or you use, there's those free conference call services, use that and press *9. I mean, you can start as modest as you want.
Right. I mean, we're using Google Meet. I mean, Zoom, and according to your definition, David, of what a podcast is, this is pretty much a podcast.
Yeah. You could call it a podcast. Yeah. So I think we've covered that pretty well. Next one we've got is from Peter. He says, would you say it's essential to have a podcast which is uploaded to iTunes or Spotify or the like, or can it live solely on your website? I think we've mostly addressed this. I think it's you got to have both. But if you guys have any more thoughts on that,
I mean, there's no harm in putting, as long as you, I mean, it's kind of, to me, non-negotiable that you put it on your website and you control the original content. But then to add it to iTunes or Spotify or to anybody else, it's a no harm, no foul to me. More distribution is always better. So there's no harm in also putting it in these other places, but just know that you have to control it. If it's only on iTunes and they change the rules, then you're going to be stuck and you might have 100 episodes there that now you got to deal with. It's much better to have those in your archive that you control and then let iTunes just scrape the content and put it out there.
Yep. If it's free, you're the product. That's the thing to keep in mind with all social media, all of these distribution channels. It's free for you to put that stuff up there because you are the product. But once they have you in that walled garden, like you said, they control the rules. You need a space of your own where you set the rules, where you can send people to and have that freedom. Let's go ahead and take this one. This is Susan. Says, does a successful podcast require conversations with guests? Can you do one around your own ideas? I'm kind of riff off this for a minute too. I kind of touched on this earlier, but you saw the whole variety of stuff that Stone and Lee, even just the stuff that they've touched. And I think of, all the podcasts that I've listened to, there's some that are interview. I mentioned Serial earlier, which is a true crime, and it's scripted, Critical Role, which is like, there's a lot of different like actual play podcasts, like radio play type stuff. I don't think, it requires a conversation with guests. I do think if you're just going to sit down and say, here's my ideas about business, it's a lot harder if you don't have somebody to bounce off. But what do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this a lot in this webinar, but in our model, guests are important because guests are the reason we're doing the shows. So that's a non-negotiable kind of part of every single one of our shows. Can you do it around your own ideas? Absolutely. There's nothing stopping you. It's free. You know, you record it, go on Google Meet, hit record, make sure it's recorded, and then talk about to your heart's content about something. If you're able to do that, or you have notes in front of you on how to, an outline of things to talk about, go for it. I mean, Bill Burr has done this for years. So,
Yeah, that's
you
right.
know,
I
so
listen to his podcast.
you can rant all you want about whatever enters your mind. But if you don't have a big following and people don't know who you are, just manage your expectations of the chances of that thing going viral and somebody, you know, lots and lots of listeners where you're going to get a sponsor. It's just going to be very difficult. It doesn't happen. It's not a build it and they will come world anymore. There's just too much content out there, and to be
Yep.
found, it's a needle in a haystack. So if you don't have money to invest in marketing your you know, your rants or your ideas or your thought leadership, it's going to be very difficult to elevate yourself above the clutter, because there's so much clutter, and the way that media is consumed today is totally different than it used to be. You can't compare today to what was, because what was, there was only a handful of media outlets. Now there's infinite.
Yep. It's and again, going back to kind of some of our experience as content marketers, you know, one of the things that we talk about is that you're no longer just competing for attention against the people that are in your space. You know, if you're a plumber, you know, and you were to start a podcast about plumbing, you know, you're not just competing against other podcasts about plumbing. You're competing for attention with, you know, Joe Rogan, and you're competing against the NBA salary cap show that my buddy Keith Smith runs, you know, and you're competing against, you know, the books on my bookshelf. You know, it's there's so much out there that I think it's very, very hard to be to have a wide, diverse audience. It's a lot easier to build on a very narrow slice. And to kind of the larger discussion about this, you know, having guests allows you to broaden your audience effectively, which is one of the reasons why most podcasts tend to have guests.
And then something else you talked about it, and it's so important, is that our attention is split nowadays, and that's, in my opinion, why advertising doesn't work or isn't as effective as it used to be, especially on television or on radio or in
Yep.
traditional media, is because just think about yourself when you're watching anything on television. Are you really watching it, or are you listening to it and you're on your phone doing something else? Are you that immersed in the content that you're just hanging on every word, and you're, you know, that all of that content is washing over you? That's not the way it is today. I don't care how, you know, rarely is there content where you're just, you know, head forward, just immersed in the content. You're doing something else while you're consuming content. And that's just the way it is today. So if you're using yesterday's model to monetize, you're going to not get yesterday's results.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's actually something where podcasts can have an advantage, because think of how many people are listening to it. You know, they're doing, you know, mundane tasks at work, or they're working out, or they're on their commute or something like that. I think a lot of podcasts are actually consumed in places where they are the primary, you know, focus of attention, which makes them, you know, powerful
Right.
in a
They're
way that not all
primary,
media
but they're
is.
not the soul. That's my point.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
It's not like when you go to the movies have your attention. You're not on your phone. You're sitting there locked in with that movie, especially like on one of these IMAX where you couldn't hear anything else if you wanted to. That experience does not translate to mobile
Mm,
in any shape or form. I'm
yep.
sorry, it's not the same thing. Whether even a podcast with headphones on, where that could be, you know, pounding in your head. You're on a treadmill, you're walking in nature, you're driving in your car, you're doing something else while consuming this. It isn't the only thing that's got your attention.
Yeah, that's fair. All right. Let's see. We've got another one here. This one comes from Megan. She says, I would love to know about the options when it comes to format. For example, longer shows with interviews, one person shows a deep dive into a topic, a 5-minute show of tips, Q&A from the host community. Wondering about ways to format a podcast and what templates have the most success, specifically for women 20 to 40 years old. I think we've covered a lot of, what the possibilities are out there. And I think you can, whatever you can think of.
Well,
Right.
let me add one
Good.
more because I do a show that's specifically for women that are 20 to 40 years old. So I have some experience in this. We do a roundtable show with a host facilitator and multiple guests, and we talk about a subject in a roundtable manner, and we really try to wring out that subject. So that is something that has been pretty successful, and they enjoy. The guests get a chance to share their expertise and have input. It also kind of checks the box for us to bring people together in network. So it helps and it creates that content in this kind of ping pong manner where it's going back and forth. So it's not just one person talking to another person. You're getting a diversity of opinions in a group. Maybe there are people of different, one's an enterprise, one's a small business, one's a subject matter expert. You can bring all those people in one place, and with a good host facilitator, you can create this kind of ping-pongy conversation. And then a lot of times a natural, authentic conversation will happen amongst the group, which is ideal. And it becomes more like kind of the Graham Norton show,
Oh, yeah.
where it's the guests are talking to each other, which in my opinion, that's like the holy grail. If you're doing something like that, that's what you're shooting for.
Yep.
And you get that kind of a vibe, and that works really well in the B2B setting, and especially with groups of women, 20 years and older.
Yeah, that's really good insight there. Let's move to the next one here. This one's from Michelle. She says, audio or both video and audio. I'll throw in a little bit from my perspective here and then pass back to you guys. I think, from my perspective, I think having one more channel, and that being YouTube, which depending on how you slice it, is the second biggest search engine in the world. Having visibility on YouTube and having video stuff that is easy to cut into clips for shorts, for reels, for TikToks, I think that is valuable, but I don't think it's necessary. I just think it does give you a few more channels to do that you don't have to add extra production to put in visualizations and that sort of thing. What do you guys think?
I was going to say, if you look like me, stick to audio. If you look like Val, seriously consider video. But I know Lee has a more in-depth answer.
Well, I mean, there's pros and cons of video, in our opinion. Video adds layers of complexity. Number one, not everybody feels comfortable being videoed or looks good on a video screen.
Yeah.
Video creates a lot of, for a lot of people, they feel self-conscious. Your whole groups of people are, if you tell them, hey, we're going to be videoing this also, you haven't made their day. You've created friction. In our world, we're trying to remove friction. So we tend not to do video. And even if you want to use the video in a podcast format or repurpose it, it's not really that compelling of a video. It's just usually a talking head just standing, talking. So it's not really video, in my opinion, is a show, not tell world. So if you're not showing something visually interesting, then why is it there? Once you get kind of the feel of a person talking in front of a mic, how much does 10 minutes of that is better than 1 minute of that? Or is 30 minutes better than 10 minutes of just somebody talking in front of a screen? I mean, I don't think it's adding that much. It might be nice as B-roll to have some video of them starting off their thing, but then I would switch to more interesting videos. So if they're talking about a subject matter, show images of whatever they're talking about rather than them just talking. But then that adds, more production costs and stuff. So you got to weigh that. So for us, it's just simpler and more effective to achieve the goals we're trying to achieve by being audio first and primarily audio only.
Well, and I think I'll add too, I know Stone's kind of joking about the what do you look like on camera thing. There is a certain amount of that, but Stavros Halkias and, Bobby Lee and, some of these, like, none of those guys are exactly, in the running with Adonis. They're, not, I don't think or what's his name? Bert Kreischer, I don't think you have to be like super, like, you don't have to be attractive to have success with video. I think it's just like, kind of depends on the show and how it runs. There's plenty of people out there doing well.
Well, and I have guests come in here and they ask permission to video. I do have one video camera. I'm going to get a second. I've got one client that we're going to upgrade and charge them more because they specifically want video. But I've also had a ton, particularly females, come in here and they specifically were just so relieved that we weren't going to do video. So I think it goes back to the first couple of slides. Figure out what you're trying to accomplish. Don't introduce anything that's going to compromise that. If it's going to enhance that or help you accomplish that objective, use it. And video can be a very powerful medium. It's definitely not our superpower. And I think it's a case by case thing. And, there's probably some people that I know there's people that know a lot more about video than we do and could really leverage it. And you can take your audio and make it into a video. So it's a deeper question, I guess.
So our answer is it depends.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what your objective is. I mean, it always goes back to that. I mean, just understand what your true north is, and everything you do should be, in reference to that. That's how you should be thinking about any endeavor, including podcasting. If it helps you get to what you're trying to accomplish, then do it.
Yep. Intentionality in everything. For the last one of our submitted questions here, we've got Tony. He says, how do you beat the chicken and egg paradox where you need a podcast with some good numbers to be able to make revenue, but you need money coming in to kick off and promote your fledgling podcast? I've got a few thoughts on this just before I throw it to you guys. I think we've talked about the business model. I know you guys have your business model that works for this. And I think too, like, it depends whether the podcast is your whole thing or it's just a part of a larger picture. Like we've talked about, most people are not Joe Rogan, where the podcast is, his media empire. And then there's some kind of tertiary, secondary and tertiary stuff coming off it. There's, if the podcast is your main moneymaker, you need a business model that supports that. Otherwise, don't come in expecting your podcast to be your main moneymaker. You got to have another purpose for that. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, in our model, it's a false premise because there's lots of ways to make money podcasting. There isn't one, having an audience and getting a sponsor is one way, and it's probably the most difficult way for a regular person. But again, it wouldn't be the most difficult way if you're a celebrity and you have millions of Instagram followers. You probably can get a sponsor the day that you start. But if you're a regular person, with a few hundred or a few thousand, social media followers, it's going to be very difficult for you to get any type of numbers where anybody's going to give you any type of money because the value isn't there for them. You're not helping them at all. And anybody that has a substantial sponsor budget when it comes to this kind of stuff are looking for people who have bigger audiences. So there is no chicken, there is no egg. There's nothing there. It's a false premise. Because if you're big enough to have a sponsor right away, then you'll do that. And if you're not, you shouldn't use sponsorship as the way to monetize.
Yep. So, I mean, you've talked about ways to monetize. I mean, I know for you guys, a lot of that's like using it as lead magnet type stuff where you're, bringing people in, maybe kind of talk about your own business model a little bit, and then maybe some alternate, monetization techniques that might be out there as well, if you've got a few in your back pocket.
So you want to take this?
Well, as conference and trade shows have been great for us. There's the model where we're helping our clients build real relationships real fast with people who write them checks or tee them up with people who write them checks. So we know those work. There are quite a few people who make money after you do the show. There's so much you can do with the content once you've got it. And we make all that available to our guests, but a lot of times they would like some help in building that into a whole digital marketing campaign, which is where you guys would come in, right?
Yep.
You can take all those marvelous assets. We've had several studio partners, me included, that have had, because we work with a lot of business people who have a book in them, but they don't want to write it. We help them talk it, and then we transcribe it, and then we get it in the hands of like someone who's like a writer or an editor. And so that's a good way to use this platform to help other people make money. Lee, I don't even know if we've counted. Did we identify like 22 revenue streams or something that our studio partners have?
Yeah, and when our clients work with us, there's dozens of ways that we can help them monetize. But for somebody who's interested in podcasting, I mean, they're going to think that a sponsorship is the best way or the most obvious way. But another way to handle this, especially even without a large audience, is before you begin, go to the sponsor first and tell them you want to do a podcast with them as the sponsor, and ask them what you could be doing to help them. And they might pay you just to do the show on their behalf, because they don't really want to get in the podcast business. So if you want to get in the podcast business, just find somebody who's kind of a little bit interested in podcasting, and then say, hey, pay me, I'll do a podcast and talk about whatever is important to you, and I'll do it for you. So there's lots and lots of ways to monetize podcasting that it's just not, you don't have to rely on having a huge audience and then selling some cost per thousand ad to that audience.
Yeah. I mean, I think the whole premise, like you said, that it's a false premise. I think about like live music, and it's like, it used to be, okay, you make a CD and you sell the CD, you make a bunch of money off the CD, or, the record or whatever, the tape, that's kind of the way that it was for a long time. And now it's like, that's not what makes the money. It's so many different revenue streams. You look at someone like, everyone from the guy playing in the coffee shop down in the corner to Taylor Swift, there's so many different revenue streams coming. It's merch, it's
Live
appearances, live
Right.
performance is a big one. There's so many different things. People think of this as the main thing that I do, my main piece of cornerstone content. How do I make money with that? It's so much broader. It's a whole mix of things, and you have to be diverse. In this is not a world where you can make money doing just one thing anymore. It's got to be a lot of different things, except for very, very rare cases.
Right. And that's where like the Rainmaker digital team can come in to open your mind to all the different ways that you can leverage this activity to grow a bigger business, whether it's, selling courses, whether it's selling coaching, whether, there's so many ways to monetize that you don't have to rely on one kind of thing, like this idea that I need a podcast to have so many listeners so I can sell a sponsor something. You got to think bigger than that. That's going to be very difficult to make something like that happen.
Yep. You got a captive audience right now.
I love a captive audience. Okay. So really for I think podcasting in general, because I know there's like a lot of different formats that I see people hosting on, like Spotify versus Apple iTunes. And I know Spotify has I think it's like their podcasting app. Is there one that you think is better to edit and host in, or do you do like all that offsite and then just like send it to different platforms? So I guess what's the best place you think to create and edit your podcast? And then I think as far as where do you send it after that?
Yeah, well, we do the editing separate, and then we the distribution is a separate. So those are kind of siloed in our workflow. So we're doing the recording, and then someone's editing it and sweetening it, and then somebody else is distributing it. So we're not using a podcast distributor to do our editing in.
Yeah. We will definitely. Greetings, Olivia, by the way. See, you just dropped in. We'll talk about that as we get further into the show as well. But yeah, definitely. I think production's an interesting one. Lee and Stone and I were talking about this beforehand. I think that people, worry more about production than they really need to. Not that production doesn't matter, but that as we'll get into some of the content questions and the audience mindedness, and having something in mind as you build the show definitely matters, I think, more than just production. Not that production isn't important.
So it's basically kind of like the very same premise, like with video, like, because I know they say, like, when you're first starting out with YouTube, it's like, okay, your production value doesn't have to be that great. It's more so the content. So it's kind of like you work every day at getting 1% better and not get trapped into you have to have this really high production value that's going to kind of like kill your creative or your content process. Basically, you want to focus your worry on the right thing. And I mean, content, the production process, you get better as you produce the content. So I assume podcasting is very much the same as video, is what I'm gathering.
Well, to me, it's pretty much the same as any creative endeavor. It goes beyond anything, just regarding this specific podcasting or video. I think if you're writing a book or you're doing anything creative, then it's more important to take action and do the thing than it is to worry about how perfect it is, because a lot of creativity is stifled by not taking that first step. And then I think that people would be better served by doing something, putting it out there, publishing it, getting feedback, and then adjusting, rather than trying to make it perfect before you even begin.
Yep.
And that's a perfect answer. So that right there's a great example. Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. So I just want to make sure before we get to that, to make sure everybody knows, this is going to be made available and sent to everybody who is registered. Whether you were here for the whole thing, weren't here for any of it, or whatever, you're going to see this. We'll have some follow-up resources we'll send to you, including, ways to get in contact with BRX, and with us. And yeah. So let me just go ahead and throw it back to you guys. Like, how can they get in contact with you? Where can they find you?
Yeah, the easiest thing to do, if you want to reach out to me, my name is Stone. My email address is stone@businessradiox.com. You can text me at 770-335-2050. And I'm happy to hop on the phone or a Zoom call or a Google Meet and try to help you think it through. Delighted to do it.
Yeah, and
Cool.
you can learn more about Business Radio X at businessradiox.com. If you want to get a hold of me and have a conversation, you just go to leekantor.com and you can schedule a call with me, and that's leekantor.com.
Sweet. And for me, you can reach out to me at davidb@rainmakerdigital.com. If you have any follow-up questions, or reach out to the team through the contact form on the site, or I think it's marketing@rainmakerdigital. And yeah, we appreciate you guys coming on. Stone, Lee, it's been great having you. It's been a great conversation. Thank you to everybody who's shown up, and everybody out there who may be seeing this later as a recording. We appreciate you. We're glad that you're here and appreciate you sending in your questions. We hope that you've gotten the answers that you wanted and the information you need. So thank you, guys.
Thank you, gentlemen, all for your time and sharing your wisdom. It was very, very helpful.
Thanks, Val.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
See you.
Right.
All right.
Awesome.
That's it for us. Let's sign off.
All right, man. Right.